Welcome to an amazing story that will inspire you and help improve your English skills. The Life of Nelson Mandela. Chapter 1: Early Life. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mbizo, in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His real name was Rulilala Mandela, which means pulling the branch of a tree in the Xhosa language. Some say it also means troublemaker. This name would later describe his role in fighting injustice. Mandela was born into the Thembu royal family. His father, Gadla Henrine Fikaniaswa, was a respected chief and an advisor to the king. His mother, Nonkafi Noskini, was a devout Christian. Even though his family was not rich, they were respected in their community. Mandela's childhood was simple but happy. He lived in a small hut made of mud and straw, surrounded by open fields and rolling hills. There was no electricity, no running water, and no modern technology, but he enjoyed the freedom of nature. As a young boy, Mandela loved to run barefoot, herd cattle, and swim in rivers. He played traditional Xhosa games with his friends and listened to elders tell stories at night. These stories were often about brave warriors and great leaders. They inspired young Mandela to dream of becoming a leader one day. One day, his father told him, "A real leader is not someone who wants power for himself. A real leader serves his people." These words stayed in Mandela's heart forever. However, when Mandela was 9 years old, his father became sick and died. This was a very sad time for him, but it also changed his life forever. His mother took him to live with Chief Jonjantaba Dalindibo, the leader of the Thembu people. The chief welcomed Mandela into his home and raised him like a son. For the first time, Mandela saw a world beyond his village. He lived in a royal palace where he watched the chief make important decisions. He learned about leadership, traditions, and responsibility. This experience helped shape his future. Chapter 2: Education and Awareness. Mandela started attending school when he was 7 years old. His teacher, Miss Ndingane, gave him the English name Nelson. It was a common practice in South Africa at that time for African children to receive English names. Even though Mandela did not understand why he needed a new name, he accepted it and focused on his studies. He was a curious and hardworking student. He loved subjects like English, history, and geography. He was especially interested in stories of African heroes who fought against colonial rule. Mandela believed that education was the key to success. He often said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." As Mandela grew older, he started to see the unfairness in society. South Africa was ruled by a system called apartheid. This system separated black and white people. Black people had fewer rights. They were not allowed to vote, own land, or live in the same areas as white people. At the age of 16, Mandela went through a traditional Xhosa ceremony where boys became men. During the ceremony, the elders spoke about the difficult life of black people under apartheid. This made Mandela feel a strong sense of responsibility. He wanted to fight for justice and equality. When he was 19 years old, something big happened. The chief arranged a marriage for him. But Mandela did not want to get married. He wanted to continue his education and choose his own future. So he made a bold decision. He ran away to the big city of Johannesburg. Chapter 3: Life in Johannesburg. When Mandela arrived in Johannesburg, he was young and full of dreams. But the city was not easy for black people. It was full of challenges and injustice. Black people had to work long hours for very little money. They lived in poor areas called townships, while white people enjoyed all the wealth and power. At first, Mandela worked as a security guard at a gold mine. Later, he found a job as a clerk in a law firm. This job introduced him to law and politics. At night, he studied law by candlelight, determined to get an education. During this time, Mandela met Walter Sisulu, a businessman and political activist. Sisulu became his mentor and introduced him to the African National Congress (ANC). The ANC was a political organization that fought for the rights of black South Africans. Mandela was inspired and joined the Angst's Youth League. Mandela worked hard to mobilize young people. He gave powerful speeches about justice, equality, and freedom. People admired his courage and leadership. One of his famous quotes from this time was, "It always seems impossible until it's done." During this period, Mandela met a beautiful and intelligent woman, Evelyn Toko Mace. She was a nurse and also wanted a better South Africa. They got married in 1944 and started a family. Mandela loved his wife and children, but his political work often kept him away from home. In 1948, something terrible happened. The South African government officially introduced new apartheid laws. These laws made life even harder for black people. They dictated where black people could live, work, and even whom they could marry. Mandela and his friends in the ANC knew they had to act. He helped organize peaceful protests, strikes, and marches. He was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, who believed in nonviolent resistance. However, the government responded with violence. Protesters were beaten, arrested, and sometimes even killed. But Mandela refused to give up. He once said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is inspiring others to move beyond it." In 1952, Mandela achieved one of his biggest dreams. He became a lawyer. He and his friend Oliver Tambo opened South Africa's first black law firm. They provided free or low-cost legal help to black South Africans who were treated unfairly under apartheid. Chapter 4: The Struggle Intensifies. In 1960, a tragic event changed Mandela's life forever. During a peaceful protest in the town of Sharpeville, police opened fire on the crowd. They killed 69 people and injured hundreds more. This event shocked the world. After Sharpeville, the government banned the ANC, forcing Mandela and other leaders to go underground. He traveled in disguise, organizing protests and secret meetings. He also traveled to other countries to gain international support. However, in 1962, the police arrested Mandela. He was charged with sabotage, treason, and attempting to overthrow the government. At his trial, he gave a historic speech. "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Mandela was sentenced to life in prison and taken to Robben Island, a harsh prison off the coast of Cape Town. Life in prison was hard. He was forced to do difficult labor, lived in a tiny cell, and was allowed only one visitor every 6 months. But Mandela never lost hope. He used his time in prison to study, teach, and plan for a better future. Chapter 5: Life in Prison. Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison in 1964. He was taken to Robben Island, a small island near Cape Town. This prison was known for its harsh conditions. Mandela was forced to do hard labor in a limestone quarry. He lived in a tiny cell with no bed, only a thin mat on the floor. He was allowed only one visitor and one letter every 6 months. The prison guards were cruel. They tried to break his spirit by making him work long hours in the hot sun. They gave prisoners little food and treated them harshly. But Mandela did not give up. Instead, he used his time in prison wisely. Mandela continued to study. He read books, wrote letters, and even taught younger prisoners about leadership and justice. He also learned Afrikaans, the language of his enemies, so he could understand them better. Even in prison, Mandela was a leader. He encouraged other prisoners to stay strong and hopeful. He once said, "I am fundamentally an optimist. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward." Over time, Mandela became a symbol of resistance. People around the world began to speak out against apartheid. Many countries refused to trade with South Africa. Famous people, like musicians and activists, called for his release. The South African government, however, refused to free him. They offered him deals if he would stop fighting against apartheid, but Mandela always refused. He believed that South Africa could only be free when apartheid was completely ended. Chapter 6: The fight continues. During the 1970s and 1980s, the fight against apartheid grew stronger. Inside South Africa, more and more people protested. Many young people joined the struggle, and the police responded with violence. Outside South Africa, countries put pressure on the government to end apartheid. Mandela was moved to Pollsmoor Prison in 1982. This prison was on the mainland and had better conditions than Robben Island. Later, he was moved to Victor Verster Prison in 1988. By this time, the South African government knew they had a problem. The world was watching, and they could no longer ignore the demand to free Mandela. In 1989, President Botha resigned, and a new leader, de Klerk, took over. De Klerk wanted to make changes. He knew that South Africa could not continue with apartheid. In 1990, after 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela was finally released. Chapter 7: Freedom at Last. On February 11, 1990, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison as a free man. The world watched in amazement. He was 71 years old, his hair had turned gray, but his spirit was unbroken. As he stepped outside, thousands of people cheered. Some cried tears of joy, others danced in the streets. Mandela raised his fist in the air, a symbol of strength and determination. His first words after being freed were, "I stand before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people." Even though he had spent almost 3 decades in prison, Mandela did not want revenge. He did not want black South Africans to hate white South Africans. Instead, he wanted peace and unity. Mandela immediately started working to bring South Africa together. He rejoined the ANC and helped to negotiate with the government to end apartheid peacefully. Chapter 8: The End of Apartheid. The years 1990 to 1994 were difficult. Even though Mandela was free, South Africa was still divided. Many people were angry and scared. Some white South Africans did not want apartheid to end. Some black South Africans wanted revenge. Violence broke out in many places. But Mandela remained calm. He met with white leaders, including President de Klerk, to talk about the future of South Africa. At first, many people did not trust each other, but Mandela believed in peace. Finally, after years of negotiations, apartheid officially ended in 1993. That same year, Mandela and de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts. In April 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election. For the first time in history, black South Africans were allowed to vote. Millions of people lined up for hours to cast their votes. It was a historic moment. Chapter 9: President Mandela. On April 27, 1994, Nelson Mandela won the election and became South Africa's first black president. The world celebrated his victory. During his inauguration speech, he said, "Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." As president, Mandela focused on healing the nation. He knew that forgiveness was the key to peace. He once said, "Resentment is like drinking poison, and then hoping it will kill your enemies." Mandela also wanted to unite black and white South Africans. One of his most famous acts was during the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Rugby was seen as a white man's sport, but Mandela supported the South African team, the Springboks. On the day of the final match, he wore a Springboks jersey and shook hands with the team captain, Francois Pienaar. South Africa won the championship, and for the first time, black and white South Africans cheered together. This powerful moment was later made into the movie Invictus. The title comes from a poem Mandela loved, which ends with the words, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." Chapter 10: Life after presidency. In 1999, after serving one term as president, Mandela stepped down. Many leaders in Africa held on to power for too long. But Mandela believed that true leadership meant knowing when to leave. Even after retiring, he continued to work on important issues. He fought for education, human rights, and the fight against HIV/AIDS. He traveled the world, meeting world leaders and inspiring young people. He believed that children were the future and once said, "The youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow." Mandela's later years were peaceful. He spent time with his family and enjoyed his grandchildren. Even though he was no longer in politics, his legacy remained strong. Chapter 11: The Passing of a Legend. On December 5, 2013, Nelson Mandela passed away at the age of 95. The world mourned his death. Millions of people attended his memorial service, including presidents, celebrities, and ordinary citizens. People remembered Mandela not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope, forgiveness, and unity. His funeral was attended by leaders from all over the world, a true sign of his global impact. Mandela's legacy continues to inspire people today. His story teaches us that never give up, no matter how hard life gets. Forgiveness is stronger than hate. One person can make a difference. His famous words remind us, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Chapter 12: Mandela's Global Influence. Even after stepping down as president in 1999, Nelson Mandela remained one of the most respected leaders in the world. He traveled to different countries, meeting presidents, kings, and ordinary people. Wherever he went, people greeted him with love and admiration. Mandela became a symbol of peace, forgiveness, and hope. His ability to bring people together was truly remarkable. Even former enemies respected him because he showed kindness and wisdom instead of anger and revenge. He continued to fight for justice, focusing on education, human rights, and the fight against poverty and disease. One of his biggest concerns was HIV/AIDS, which was a growing problem in South Africa. At the time, many people in South Africa did not talk about HIV/AIDS openly. There was a lot of fear and misinformation about the disease. Mandela wanted to change that. In 2005, Mandela made a very brave and personal announcement: his own son, Makatho Mandela, had died of AIDS. By speaking openly about it, Mandela helped break the stigma. He encouraged people to get tested, seek treatment, and support those with HIV/AIDS. His words saved many lives. Chapter 13: The Mandela Foundation and His Final Years. In his later years, Mandela focused on philanthropy and charity work. He created the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which supports education, healthcare, and community development in South Africa. One of his most famous projects was Mandela Day. In 2009, the United Nations declared July 18 Mandela's birthday as Nelson Mandela International Day. Mandela believed that everyone has the power to change the world, even in small ways. On Mandela Day, people around the world are encouraged to spend 67 minutes doing something good for others. Why 67 minutes? Because Mandela dedicated 67 years of his life to fighting for justice and equality. Whether it's helping a neighbor, feeding the poor, or cleaning up a park, Mandela wanted everyone to take small actions that could make a big difference. Even as he grew older, Mandela continued to inspire the world. However, his health began to decline. In 2011, he was hospitalized several times. People around the world prayed for him. His last public appearance was during the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, where thousands of fans cheered and waved at him. Mandela spent his final years at home, surrounded by his family and close friends. He passed away peacefully on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95. Chapter 14: The World Mourns a Legend. The news of Nelson Mandela's passing was met with sadness and tributes from all over the world. Leaders, celebrities, and ordinary people expressed their respect and gratitude. World leaders like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and Queen Elizabeth II paid tribute to Mandela's legacy. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a close friend of Mandela, said, "He was a unifier. He taught us that reconciliation is possible. He was truly South Africa's greatest son." Mandela's memorial service was held on December 10, 2013, in Johannesburg. It was one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in history. Over 90 presidents and prime ministers attended. Even leaders from countries that were once enemies came together to honor his legacy. After the memorial, Mandela's body was flown to his hometown, KwaZulu, where he was laid to rest in a traditional Xhosa ceremony. Millions of people around the world watched the funeral on TV. South Africans sang songs of freedom and danced in celebration of his life. Though Mandela was physically gone, his spirit and message remained alive. Chapter 15: Mandela's legacy lives on. Nelson Mandela's impact did not end with his death. His teachings, speeches, and example continue to inspire new generations. Here are some of the most important lessons we can learn from his life. 1. Forgiveness is more powerful than revenge. Mandela spent 27 years in prison, but when he was freed, he did not seek revenge. Instead, he forgave those who imprisoned him and worked to unite South Africa. His message: courageous people do not fear forgiving for the sake of peace. 2. Education can change the world. Mandela believed that knowledge gives people power. That is why he studied in prison and fought for better schools for black South Africans. His famous quote, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." 3. One person can make a difference. At first, Mandela was just one man, but he inspired millions to stand up against apartheid.
Even in difficult times, he never gave up.
His story proves that one person's actions can create big change. His message: it always seems impossible until it's done. 4. Never stop dreaming.
Mandela believed in a better future and fought for it, even when others doubted him.
His powerful words: I never lose. I either win or learn. 5. Serve others. Mandela's life was about helping others, not just himself. He encouraged people to give back to their communities. His challenge to the world: what counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others. Chapter 16: The impact of Nelson Mandela today. Today, South Africa is free, thanks to Mandela's sacrifices and leadership. Though challenges remain, the country is now a democracy, where all races have equal rights. Around the world, Mandela's name is respected and honored. There are statues, schools, streets, and even a United Nations Day named after him. Every year on July 18, people celebrate Mandela Day by helping others. His life story is taught in schools, and his speeches continue to motivate leaders, activists, and ordinary people. Mandela's example reminds us that we should stand up for justice, even when it's difficult. We should treat others with kindness and respect. We should believe in a better world and work to create it. Though he is gone, his legacy lives on in every person who fights for freedom, equality, and peace. Final thoughts: the man who changed the world. Nelson Mandela's life was not easy. He faced prison, hardship, and injustice. But he never lost hope. He turned pain into power, hatred into love, and division into unity. His story teaches us that no matter how hard life gets, we must never give up. In his own words, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. As long as people remember his courage, his kindness, and his dreams, Nelson Mandela will never be forgotten.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe this channel and enjoy learning English.